Picture this: a grand palace in early 19th century Spain, gilded halls dripping with gold and opulence, courtiers whispering behind silken fans, shadows lurking in every corner. The king sits on his throne, but this is no ordinary monarch. Ferdinand VII, crowned with power but ruled by dark obsession, known across Europe not for his leadership but for the whispered scandals, the secret debauchery, and the ruthless cruelty hidden behind his royal mask. His reign was marked by betrayal, lust, and corruption so deep it threatened to tear a nation apart. From illegitimate children born in secret chambers to political betrayals that crushed hopes for a modern Spain, Ferdinand's story is a twisted tale of power abused and darkness unleashed. What drove this king to such perversion? How did his personal demons shape the fate of a kingdom? This is the tragic story of power, obsession, and betrayal. Picture the grand halls of the royal palace of Aranjuez, bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, echoing with the footsteps of servants and courtiers alike. In these gilded chambers, on October 14, 1784, Ferdinand was born, the future King of Spain. Son of King Charles IV and Queen Maria Louisa of Parma, Ferdinand was a prince born into privilege, destined to wear a crown. But beneath the surface of his royal upbringing lay a darker, restless spirit, shaped by a turbulent family and an unstable court. From a young age, Ferdinand's life was tangled in the political and personal dramas of the Spanish monarchy. His father, Charles IV, was a weak ruler, a man easily swayed by his ambitious wife and the influence of his prime minister, Manuel Godoy. Godoy, often seen as a royal favorite, wielded immense power, but his reputation was deeply tarnished by rumors of corruption, incompetence, and scandalous behavior. As Godoy rose, the court became a hotbed of intrigue, alliances forged and broken, loyalties tested by greed and ambition. Ferdinand grew up watching these power plays with a keen eye but also with growing bitterness. His relationship with his parents was complicated. His father's weakness contrasted sharply with his mother's domineering nature. Queen Maria Louisa was a woman of intense ambition, wielding her influence ruthlessly to maintain control over the king and court affairs. But she was also rumored to engage in secret liaisons, fueling scandalous whispers about the royal family. These family dynamics deeply shaped young Ferdinand's worldview, a world where power was unstable and trust was fragile. Educated by tutors who emphasized loyalty to the crown and Catholic faith, Ferdinand's formal training was meant to prepare him for kingship. Yet, behind the polished lessons, the prince's upbringing was riddled with contradictions. The royal court was a place where decadence masked danger and personal vice often disguised itself as political strategy. Ferdinand absorbed these lessons, but his personality grew restless and unpredictable. By the time he was a young man, Ferdinand was already showing signs of the darker impulses that would mark his reign. Known for his charm and intelligence, he could also be cruel, impulsive, and manipulative. His early romantic life was scandalous. He was infamous for his numerous affairs, many with noble women, courtesans, and even actresses. But what was most troubling was how his indulgence in desire blurred the lines between personal pleasure and political power. These liaisons weren't just private escapades. They often served to build alliances or destroy rivals. The political climate of Europe during Ferdinand's youth was volatile. The French Revolution had shattered old orders, and Napoleon Bonaparte's meteoric rise was reshaping the continent. Spain found itself caught in the crossfire. Ferdinand's father and Godoy attempted to navigate these dangerous waters, but their efforts failed spectacularly. When Napoleon invaded Spain in 1808, the Spanish monarchy was thrown into chaos. Amid this turmoil, Ferdinand's role shifted dramatically. His father abdicated the throne under pressure, and Ferdinand was proclaimed king. But this was no triumphant ascent. Instead, Ferdinand became a puppet in the hands of Napoleon, who installed his brother Joseph Bonaparte as King of Spain. This betrayal shattered the Spanish people's faith in their monarchy and set off a brutal war of resistance, the Peninsular War, that would ravage the country for years. Ferdinand's captivity by the French was both physical and psychological. Locked away in various prisons and palaces far from Madrid, the young king lived in isolation. But rather than emerge as a strong leader, Ferdinand's time in captivity seemed to harden his darker traits. Reports from the period describe him as increasingly paranoid, obsessed with control, and driven by a desire to reclaim not just the throne but also absolute power. Upon his release in 1814, Ferdinand returned to a Spain devastated by war and social upheaval. His reign officially resumed, but the country he inherited was fractured. The ideals of the Enlightenment and liberalism had taken root during the war, challenging the traditional absolutist monarchy Ferdinand embodied. Yet, Ferdinand was determined to crush these new ideas and restore the old order at any cost. This determination shaped the early years of his reign in ways that would forever stain his legacy. Ferdinand VII's rule was marked by reactionary policies, censorship, and brutal repression of political opponents. He abolished the liberal constitution of 1812, reinstated the Inquisition, and persecuted liberals and reformists. His government became a theater of cruelty and corruption, with the king at the center of scandals involving bribery, favoritism, and moral decay. But perhaps what truly set Ferdinand apart from his predecessors, and what would earn him his dark reputation, was the depth of his personal depravity. While Spain struggled with war and poverty, Ferdinand indulged in excesses that shocked even the scandal-hardened aristocracy. Tales circulated about his secret chambers filled with forbidden pleasures, including sexual orgies, exploitation of women, and rumored involvement in depraved acts that would make even the most jaded courtiers recoil. One of the most disturbing aspects of Ferdinand's personal life was his treatment of women. Despite being married multiple times, his relationships were marked by betrayal, cruelty, and manipulation. His wives and mistresses were often pawns in his political games, but they also endured emotional and physical abuse behind closed doors. Historical accounts describe Ferdinand's jealousy and sadistic tendencies, as well as his obsession with control and dominance. This combination of political ruthlessness and personal depravity created a toxic atmosphere at the Spanish court. Nobles and ministers lived in fear of the king's unpredictable wrath, while the public despised him for his corruption and excess. Rumors of illegitimate children born in secret, of brutal punishments meted out for perceived betrayals, and of sinister plots within the palace walls fueled an aura of darkness around Ferdinand VII's reign. Yet, paradoxically, Ferdinand managed to hold on to power for nearly 2 decades. His reign coincided with a period of immense change and crisis in Spain. The country faced wars for independence in Latin America, internal revolts, and growing demands for constitutional government. Throughout it all, Ferdinand clung to his vision of absolute monarchy, resisting reform and clinging to outdated traditions. In this first section of Ferdinand's story, we see the roots of a king whose life was a toxic blend of political intrigue, personal vice, and dark obsession. Born into privilege but shaped by a chaotic family and unstable court, Ferdinand VII's early years laid the foundation for a reign marked by cruelty, corruption, and scandal. His rise to power was less a heroic ascent and more a descent into a world where power was wielded as a weapon and personal desires were pursued without restraint. As we move deeper into his reign, the true extent of Ferdinand's depravity and its consequences on Spain's fate become painfully clear. The shadows of the king's personal demons stretch far beyond the palace walls, touching the lives of millions and shaping the course of a nation's history. When Ferdinand VII returned to the throne in 1814, Spain was a country in ruins. The Peninsular War had devastated the land, leaving a shattered economy, widespread poverty, and a population exhausted by years of violence and deprivation. Yet, rather than rebuild with compassion or vision, Ferdinand's response was to tighten his grip on power through ruthless reactionary rule, throwing the nation back into the dark ages of absolutism. The moment Ferdinand stepped back into the royal palace, he did something that shocked many but pleased his conservative allies. He abolished the liberal constitution of 1812, the Cadiz Constitution, which had promised freedoms, reforms, and a new political order. This document was the symbol of hope for many Spaniards who wanted a modern state ruled by laws, not the whims of an all-powerful monarch. By tearing it up, Ferdinand declared war on the future. This rejection of progress marked the beginning of one of the most repressive and turbulent periods in Spanish history. Ferdinand reinstated the Inquisition, an institution synonymous with fear, censorship, and brutal punishment for those deemed enemies of the crown or church. Liberal thinkers, reformers, and anyone suspected of opposing the king's absolute rule faced persecution, imprisonment, torture, or execution. Ferdinand's government quickly became a breeding ground for corruption and nepotism. He surrounded himself with sycophants and loyalists who enriched themselves at the expense of the people. Ministers and court officials engaged in bribery and embezzlement, while the king himself was rumored to have amassed enormous personal wealth through dubious means. Spain's treasury was drained, and the common people bore the brunt through increased taxes and neglect. But perhaps the most infamous aspect of Ferdinand's reign was the sheer cruelty with which he dealt with dissent. Secret police networks operated throughout the country, spying on citizens, infiltrating opposition groups, and ruthlessly crushing any sign of rebellion. Countless political prisoners filled dark dungeons, many disappearing without a trace. Torture was common, and public executions served as grim warnings to anyone daring to challenge the king's authority. Amid this climate of terror, Ferdinand's personal scandals grew more outrageous. His private life was a macabre spectacle that fascinated and horrified his contemporaries. Known for his lasciviousness, the king engaged in a series of illicit affairs that defied all bounds of royal decorum. His relationships were often transactional, using women to consolidate power or punish enemies, but they also revealed a darker obsession with control, humiliation, and depravity. One of the darkest rumors involved Ferdinand's alleged exploitation of women in the palace itself. Historical gossip hints at secret chambers where the king held debauched gatherings, lavish orgies blending politics and lust, attended by courtiers, mistresses, and even foreign dignitaries. Some accounts suggest that young women were coerced or kidnapped for these events, victims of a king who saw his subjects as mere playthings. Moreover, Ferdinand's treatment of his wives was equally scandalous. He was married 4 times, but none of his marriages were happy or healthy. His first wife, Maria Antonia of Naples, died young under suspicious circumstances. His subsequent wives endured neglect, humiliation, and public disgrace. The king's jealousy and paranoia fueled violent outbursts, often directed at his consorts and their alleged lovers or conspirators. Ferdinand's obsession with control extended beyond his personal relationships. He sought to dominate every aspect of Spanish life, from religion to education, from the press to the military. His policies aimed to suppress any hint of liberalism or independence movements, particularly in the colonies. This led to the loss of much of Spain's empire in the Americas, as colonies rebelled against the repressive regime and fought for freedom. Yet, despite his cruelty and corruption, Ferdinand was a complex figure. Some historians argue that he genuinely believed in the divine right of kings and saw himself as the protector of Spain's traditional values and Catholic faith. His brutality and excess, then, were not mere personal flaws but expressions of a desperate attempt to preserve a crumbling world order. But this worldview blinded Ferdinand to the realities facing Spain. The country was changing rapidly, and his refusal to adapt only deepened its decline. The economy faltered, infrastructure decayed, and social unrest grew. Liberal revolutions erupted in various regions, demanding constitutional government and an end to royal tyranny. Yet Ferdinand met these uprisings with force, refusing to compromise or reform. The tension reached a boiling point in the 1820s when a military uprising forced Ferdinand to reinstate the Constitution of 1812 briefly, a humiliating concession that revealed the limits of his power. This period, known as the Trienio Liberal, was a fleeting glimpse of hope, but it ended in 1823 when French troops invaded to restore Ferdinand's absolute rule. His return to power was marked by a reign of terror even worse than before, with widespread executions and purges. Throughout these years, the king's reputation among the people sank to new lows. Pamphlets, songs, and popular tales spread stories of his cruelty and depravity. His nickname El Decido, the Desired, was mocked, as many saw him not as a beloved ruler but as a tyrant consumed by vice and cruelty. To understand the full darkness of Ferdinand's reign, one must also consider the psychological toll of his personal demons. Many contemporary and later accounts describe him as deeply paranoid, prone to fits of rage and depression. His early experiences of captivity, betrayal, and family dysfunction seem to have warped his personality. The paranoia manifested in a constant fear of conspiracies, leading him to purge anyone he suspected of disloyalty, often without evidence. This mindset permeated the entire court. Trust was scarce, alliances fragile. Ministers and nobles lived in fear of sudden downfall, while the king's whims dictated the fate of entire families. The palace became a prison for those trapped within its gilded walls, and the country a land held hostage by one man's unstable psyche. Despite these horrors, Ferdinand VII died in 1833, leaving behind a legacy of destruction and scandal. His death marked the end of an era but also triggered a new conflict, the Carlist Wars, fueled by disputes over succession and competing visions for Spain's future. The shadow of Ferdinand's reign would linger long after his passing, a grim reminder of how absolute power, unchecked by morality or reason, can devastate a nation. In this section, we've seen Ferdinand VII not just as a political figure but as a deeply flawed human being whose personal vices and dark secrets shaped his reign and left scars on Spanish history. His tyranny, corruption, and depravity contributed to Spain's decline in the 19th century and continue to fascinate historians and storytellers alike. As we continue, we'll explore the aftermath of Ferdinand's reign and how Spain struggled to overcome the shadows he cast. A nation caught between the past and the future, haunted by the ghosts of a king who embodied both its darkest fears and tragic failures. The death of Ferdinand VII in 1833 did not bring peace or resolution to Spain. Instead, it plunged the country into one of the most chaotic and violent chapters in its history. His reign had left Spain fractured, politically, socially, and morally, and the vacuum created by his passing opened the gates for a brutal conflict that would last for decades, the Carlist Wars. Ferdinand's final act, and one that sparked immense controversy, was his decision to alter the traditional rules of succession. Before his death, he issued the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, which allowed his daughter Isabella to inherit the throne, despite the long-standing Salic law that barred women from the Spanish crown. This was seen by many as a direct challenge to the established order and provoked fierce opposition. The main challenger was Ferdinand's brother, Carlos Maria Isidro de Bourbon, known as Don Carlos. He was a staunch conservative and absolutist who believed the throne rightfully belonged to him under the old laws. Don Carlos and his supporters, known as Carlists, represented a reactionary faction that wanted to restore traditional monarchy, defend the Catholic Church's privileged position, and resist liberal reforms. Thus began the First Carlist War, 1833 to 1840, a bloody civil war that tore Spain apart. The conflict was not just about who sat on the throne. It was a battle between two visions of Spain's future, one reactionary and monarchist, the other liberal and reformist. The Carlists found strong support in rural areas, especially in the Basque Country, Catalonia, and Valencia, where traditional values and resistance to central government reforms ran deep. The war devastated the countryside. Brutal guerrilla warfare, massacres, and scorched earth tactics became common. Families were divided, towns destroyed, and the economy further crippled. The conflict laid bare the deep social and political fractures within Spanish society, many of which had festered under Ferdinand's oppressive rule. Isabella II, Ferdinand's daughter and new queen, was only a child when she ascended the throne, which meant the country was effectively ruled by regents and political factions. Her reign would be marked by instability, corruption, and further conflict. The legacy of Ferdinand's tyranny haunted her rule, as the forces of absolutism and liberalism continued to clash violently. During this period, Spain struggled to modernize. The liberal governments attempted to dismantle the old feudal structures, weaken the power of the church, and promote industrialization and education. However, these reforms were uneven and often met with fierce resistance from conservatives and the rural populace, who saw their traditions and way of life under threat. Meanwhile, the Carlist movement persisted beyond the First War, igniting two more civil wars in the mid-19th century, each devastating the country anew. These wars became proxy battles for larger ideological conflicts: monarchy versus republicanism, tradition versus progress, religion versus secularism. They also shaped Spanish politics for decades, fueling cycles of violence and instability. Beyond the wars, Ferdinand's reign and its aftermath had long-lasting effects on Spanish culture and society. His reputation as a cruel and perverse monarch entered folklore, literature, and popular memory. He was often portrayed as the embodiment of the worst traits of absolute monarchy, a symbol of repression, decadence, and moral decay. His personal scandals, rumored orgies, and grotesque court intrigues inspired countless stories and gossip, painting a lurid picture of a king who abused his power not just politically but sexually. Some historians have debated the accuracy of these tales, suggesting they were exaggerated by his enemies or later writers eager to vilify him. Yet, the persistence of these narratives speaks to the lasting impact of his toxic image. On a political level, Ferdinand VII's failure to embrace constitutional monarchy or liberal reforms set Spain back significantly. While other European countries were gradually moving toward democracy and modernization, Spain remained trapped in cycles of absolutism and civil war. This delayed the country's development and contributed to the deep regional divides that still influence Spanish politics today. In economic terms, the damage wrought by Ferdinand's wars and policies was immense. The Peninsular War had already devastated the economy, and his reign's repression and instability prevented effective recovery. Agriculture remained backward, industry underdeveloped, and infrastructure poor. The loss of most American colonies during his reign further weakened Spain's economic position, stripping it of crucial resources and markets. Socially, Ferdinand's rule and its aftermath entrenched divisions between classes. The nobility and clergy retained privileges, while the middle and lower classes struggled with poverty and limited opportunities. These inequalities fueled social unrest and the rise of radical political movements later in the century. In the international arena, Spain's decline under Ferdinand VII diminished its standing as a global power. Once a dominant empire, it was reduced to a fractured state struggling with internal conflicts. Foreign powers often intervened, supporting one faction or another to advance their own interests, further complicating Spain's political landscape. To sum up, the aftermath of Ferdinand VII's reign was a Spain caught in a painful transition. The king's personal flaws and political failures set off a chain reaction that led to civil war, social upheaval, and economic stagnation. His dark legacy cast a long shadow over the 19th century, making him one of the most controversial and reviled monarchs in Spanish history. If you found this video on Ferdinand VII's dark secrets intriguing, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history's hidden stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Ferdinand VII was truly history's most perverted king? Or is there more to the story? Drop your opinions in the comments below. And if you want to explore more shocking and untold tales from the past, tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching. Let's uncover history's darkest secrets together.